Hey everyone, in this video we will learn how your Rails application can offload the responsibility of serving static files to a reverse proxy such as Nginx or Thruster. There are a few different reasons you may want to do this. First, the file that you want to serve could be too big for your Rails application to load into memory. It could tie up your application process, during which other requests would have to wait. Also, the app servers aren't designed to build huge file downloads or serving files. Web servers like Nginx are highly optimized for serving large files. So if you let your web server reverse proxy take care of serving files, your application server frees up to handle more requests. So this is how it works in practice. So the browser sends a request to for the file to your application server. First, Nginx or any reverse proxy intercepts that request. It forwards that request to the Rails application server, which performs any authentication or an authorization logic to verify if the user can indeed access that file. Once it passes, instead of loading that file into the memory of your application server and sending that back to the client, what the application server does, it only sends a specific header, X-Sendfile or X-Accel-Redirect, depending on which server you are using, and it passes the path to that file that it wants to serve. That's it. Application server is not loading the file in memory. It is only sending that specific header. Now the response comes back to the reverse proxy, Nginx or Thruster. It reads that specific header. Now it knows that the application server wants it to serve that file. So it goes to that location, fetches that file, and sends it back to the browser. So that's what I meant by application server offloading the responsibility of serving static files to the reverse proxy. Let me show you a quick demo. I have a simple Rails application. Let me launch that. Okay, so here's a simple Rails application that allows users to download reports only after verifying if they're allowed to access them. Okay, now this is different from serving public files such as style sheets and images from a public CDN, as your Rails app still needs to authenticate and verify the user. So the request will still hit the Rails application server. As you can see here, request still goes to the application server. It's just that the Rails app won't load the file into memory to serve it. It will use reverse proxy to serve the file. Okay. So first, let me show you the setup for the application. So I have a simple route here that hits the reports controller show method, show action. So whenever a user clicks the download PDF button, it goes to the reports controller. And here what we're doing, first we check if the user is authorized. So this is what I meant by your Rails apps still needs to process the request before it sends the file. So this is we do that here. Since it's a demo, I'm not showing the user authentication or authorization, but assuming you do that, to serve the file, all you have to do is set a specific header. Now X-Accel-Redirect is a header specific to Nginx web server. If you're using Thruster or even Apache, it's called X-Sendfile, but I'm using Nginx, so I'm setting this header, and I'm setting its value to a specific path called protected / the name of the file. Okay, now as you can see, I have a files directory in my Rails project which contains the files that I want to serve. They're under files directory, but you can see I'm setting the protected path here. Okay, now that fits in the Nginx config. So this is my Nginx config. Remember that I haven't yet started Nginx server, so when I'll start that in a second, but the idea is the request controller sets this header X-Accel-Redirect, and it sets its value to protected / file name. Now on its way out to the client, the Rails app will send the response back to Nginx. Nginx inspects the response header Now we have set the header X-Accel-Redirect, so it will redirect to the protected path. Now it's an internal route, so no one public cannot access it, but since it's an internal redirect, Nginx will allow that, and it will use the files directory to handle the files. Okay, so what this means is whenever it sees a response header protected response header X-Accel-Redirect with the value protected and file name, it will serve that file from the files directory. So let's try that, but before that, let me just show you what happens if I just click download in a Rails app. Okay, so remember, I haven't started Nginx yet. I'm directly hitting the 3000 port, that is the Puma application server. So if I click download PDF, you see it fails to load the PDF document because we are not actually sending the file. If you see the controller action, I'm just setting the header, and Puma doesn't know what to do with that header. So now let's start the Nginx proxy. I'll go to the terminal and run Nginx. Want to use the current directory, and we want to give a specific config file instead of the default file. So I have this Nginx config in my Rails project, so that's why I'm passing that location here. So Nginx is now started, and let's go back to the config again, and you can see it's listening on 1443, and it's using the rails.local host for HTTPS. So let's go there. So this is the Nginx URL. Okay, so now the application loads here. Just to reiterate, this is the Rails application running on port 3000. This is the same application but behind the reverse proxy, or behind Nginx. So now let's see what happens when I click download PDF. You can see the URL here at the bottom left. It's hitting the reports programming PDF path. So when I click download PDF, you can see the file downloads. Okay, and to explain what happens again, the request comes here. We set the response header X-Accel-Redirect to that path. Then the response goes back to Nginx. It sees that header X-Accel-Redirect. It means it understands that the Rails app wants it to serve that file. Then it redirects that to this path here, which is an internal location, and it serves that file from the files directory, and you can access that file here. Let's try to download the other file, and it works. Okay, that's good. Now that you have seen how you can serve static files using Nginx, let's move on to Thruster. So Thruster is a HTTP2 reverse proxy designed by 37 Signals. It is part of the Kamal deployment tool, but you can use it without Kamal, which is what we are going to do now. So among other things, it supports X-Sendfile header to serve static files. So just as we saw, Nginx used X-Accel-Redirect header, Thruster uses X-Sendfile, similar to Apache header server. So to start Thruster and use it to proxy requests to your Rails application, you'll use this command, thrust bin Rails server. So let's do that. First, I'll stop the Rails application, and I will also stop the Nginx web server. Now let's run the thrust command first, but I'll start it with the debug environment variable set to true, as well as I'll pass the HTTP port that I want to use for Thruster, and then I'll run the thrust command. And in case you're not sure where these environment variables come from, if you scroll down, you can see all the variables that Thruster supports, and you can use any of them here. So I'm using debug. I'm setting debug flag to true so I can see the debug logs, and I'm also setting the HTTP port so we can access the application on a different port than 3000, which is the Puma server's port. Okay, so let's run our application. And as you can see, our application has been started. Puma is running on port 3000, but the thruster is running on port 8080. Okay, so let's first go to 3000 and see. Oh, before that, I need to change branches, which I haven't done. So let's do that. Okay, so now let's go back to our reports controller. Now you can see instead of setting X-Accel-Redirect, I'm setting a different header called X-Sendfile, and now I'm directly passing the location of that protected file here. Okay, we are not using a different path like we used with Nginx. So that's it. We are ready for thruster, and if I load the Puma application and if I try to download, it won't work again because Puma doesn't know how to handle this header. But now let's go to localhost 8080. I'll reload the page, and if I try to download it, I can access the file. If I see the logs, yeah, here's the log from thruster, X-Sendfile sending file, and here's the path that I gave it. Okay, so that's how you can use thruster to serve the static files. So now that we have seen how thruster can handle or serve static files, what we are going to do is we are going to open the thruster source code and we are going to explore how it actually works. So here's the thruster repo that I've cloned. It's written in Go, which I find a very readable programming language. Even if you are not familiar with Go, I hope that you stick with me. I think it will definitely make sense. Okay, so the main files serving code is in the Sendfile handler. Now in Go web services, a handler is something like a middleware in Rails applications. If you're not familiar with middlewares, I've written a blog post on that called Rails Middleware, almost everything you need to know, which explains how the concept of middleware. Basically what they are is you receive a request from the client and your app server. It goes through a bunch of middlewares which operate on that request before it reaches your application. And on the way out, it again operates on the response to modify or even not modify it. Okay, depending on the needs. You can have a logging middleware, you can have authentication middleware, and you can have a bunch of different middlewares. If you run the Rails middleware command in your Rails application, it shows you all the middlewares it's using. So that's the concept of middleware. In Go, it is called a handler and it works in the same way. So for example, Sendfile handler, it's used here. Basically, when a request comes to thruster, it goes to first proxy handler, then cache handler, Sendfile handler, and reaches your application. Then it goes back in the same order. Okay, so if you're not familiar with Go, think of this as a class. Basically, it's a struct object. We are not defining methods here. Methods are defined somewhere else here, but think of it as a placeholder to hold data. So Sendfile handler is a struct that can be enabled or disabled depending on the need. By default, it's enabled in thruster. And next is just a next handler where it will pass the request to. So basically, we create a new instance of new file handler, and the main part is this serve HTTP method. So this middleware receives the request, then it checks if the sending file is enabled or not. If it is enabled, it sets a specific header X-Sendfile type, and it sets its value to X-Sendfile. Now this is a special header. It tells the upstream or the Rails application what's the exact header it's using for sending files. So Rails application can use that. So once that's done, it forwards the request to the next middleware or your application. So that's done. Now the Rails server handles that request. It sets the specific header X-Sendfile and it sends it back to thruster. Now on its way back, what happens is it calls this write method on the handler, and this is the part where it modifies the outgoing response Okay, so what happens is it first checks if the header is not written, and then it calls this method, right, header. What this does, it first calls the sending file name, and it gets the response header value, which is X-Sendfile. Now remember that we have set the X-Sendfile value here on the response headers. It gets that value, saves that in file name, and then it deletes that header. The client or the browser doesn't need to know what was the value of that path. Okay, so it deletes that header, then it sends the sending file to true because file name is now a proper path, and then it serves the file. So let's go to that serve file method. This is the most important part. It basically uses the HTTP serve file method to serve the file from that specified path. Okay, and that's basically it. Thruster serves that file and sends it back to the next middleware or to the browser. And that's how Thruster works. It's not that difficult. Basically, all it's doing is reading the value of a specific response header, fetching and sending that file to the client. That's it. Thanks for watching my video. I hope you found it helpful and you learned something new. If you would like to learn more, I'm also going to publish a blog post on the same topic on my blog at writesoftwarewell.com. It's if you are not familiar with my blog, it's a blog focused on Ruby on Rails, and you can subscribe to the blog to receive future posts via email and keep in touch with me. So thanks again for watching, and see you in the next video. Bye.